Welcome back to the 4D Side Podcast. I am Victor Ciccarelli, and today we are here with Barbara Wiseman. Barbara has spent more than 20 years working on one of the biggest environmental questions on the planet, water. She's the co-founder and president of the Earth Organization. She helped leading international efforts looking for practical solutions to water scarcity around the world. And through the Earth Organization, she has brought together scientists, researchers, exploring some of things that most of us have never heard of before, deep-seated water. The idea that deep underground water sources may exist far below the aquifers we normally think about, and then locating them could change how drought-prone regions find sustainable water. Today we're going to talk about water, the future, and why something none of us ever really give a lot of concern about is one of the most important issues in the next century. Barbara, welcome.
Thanks, Victor. It's good to be on your show.
Did I leave anything out?
Oh, nothing. You covered my entire life.
Well, I'm sure I got close, but I hit the good point. So we're going to talk about water, and that's the big topic. But let's start with something more fundamental. How did you get here, and how did you get involved in this whole thing?
Well, I think it's kind of an interesting story, actually. A good friend of mine by the name of Dr. Lawrence Anthony was a world-renowned conservationist, and you probably don't remember his name, but you might remember his story. Your audience might remember his story. He was the man who went into Baghdad at the very beginning of the war in 2003 and rescued the Baghdad Zoo. And it was an international story. It got covered for years, actually, what he did there. It was an extraordinary rescue initiative where everybody else was fleeing, and he went in to rescue the zoo that he knew would be in, very deep trouble. Because, of course, a zoo is one of the first things to fall to the bottom of most people's priority list in a war, right? But what happens is the animals there, starve or die from dehydration or, get used for food for the people in the area who are starving. And it's a very bad scene. So he went in and he rescued that zoo, and he became world renowned for that. Additionally, your listeners may recognize the story. The media dubbed him the Elephant Whisperer because he had an absolutely almost mythological relationship with a herd of wild elephants that he rescued. Long story short, to the point where when he passed away in 2012, the whole herd perceived it. He was 300 miles away, and they perceived that he died, and they walked 12 miles in obvious distress to his home. And then every year for 4 years afterwards, on the anniversary of his death, they returned to the house.
Wow.
It was just like, that's why I call it, almost mythological relationship. It was just amazing. But he was an extraordinary and wonderful person. And towards the end of or actually at the end of his 6-month rescue of the zoo in Baghdad, he, a couple of months after he first got there, some of the top environmental and conservation groups in the world showed up, ostensibly to help, but he was extremely disappointed in what he saw, because even with the best of intentions, they really didn't know what to do. And so it just appeared that they were there just to show their millions of members that they were there, raise a lot of money off the backs of, the crisis for the animals, and none of that money went to actually doing anything there. And then they left. So he and I were already good friends, and he asked me if I would help him start an environmental organization, but that would be that would operate on a pretty unique, logical set of guidelines. And one is that when we come up with a solution, that the solution must work for all involved, not just the spotted owl, right? Or not just one vested interest. It has to work for people It has to work for jobs, the economy, business and industry, as well as nature. So when he first asked me if I would help him, I was the executive director of a good sized management consulting firm at that time, and felt that what I was doing was really important. I was helping private practice owners flourish so that they could, be more philanthropic themselves. They could spend more time with their families. They could achieve their goals. And I thought, well, that would be really fun. Go play with Lawrence and some animals, right? But but I before I politely told him no thank you, I decided to just step back and take a look at what was actually happening in this whole field of the environment, right? And the more I looked, the more appalled I became. And this is back in 2003. So, what was appalling was there were so many good people in this field wanting to do the right thing. And just based on the statistical analysis training that I've had, it became very apparent that large numbers of these people, their attention was being focused on things that weren't really as big of an issue as was being promoted, or as was sounding so alarming, and things that were horrifically alarming weren't even being addressed, weren't even being looked at that time. And so I actually felt duty motivated at that point to, bring the skills that I have, and help him start this organization. And we named it the Earth Organization, all three words, the Earth Organization. For a while, we even called it the Lawrence Anthony Earth Organization, actually, after he passed away in 2012. But nobody can remember that name. so we went back to just the Earth Organization, which is really easy to understand.
That's amazing. I was actually in Baghdad. I was an operations specialist with the military at the time, so I
No
was in that
kidding.
theater during that all of that happened. So I have a little, yeah, I have a perspective on that as well. But how did you get from elephant whisperer and saving zoos into water?
Well, here's the thing: the purpose of the Earth Organization, our mission basically is to bring solutions in and implement environmental solutions to major environmental challenges. So we're not just all about rescuing wildlife in war zones and that sort of thing. We have taken on a broad spectrum of different issues, and what makes it possible for us to do that successfully is that we have this 6-step operating basis that we follow. Whenever we take on an issue, the first step is we research to first ensure, does this issue actually exist? Or is this just some other thing going on in the media or
Right.
whatever, right? If it actually exists and actually is important, then step two is we do a lot of research to find the honest to God source of the problem. And it's very rarely is it what's being promoted as the source. It's always somewhat different, and sometimes completely different, right? But once we found the real source of the problem, then step three is we then do the necessary research to find a solution that will that will benefit all the stakeholders involved, right? As I said before, people, jobs, economy, business, as well as nature, and that can be implemented effectively and economically, and that won't have other trade-offs, you know. So, so then step four is we either implement that solution ourselves, or depending on the situation, we get the solution into the hands of others who will implement it effectively. Step five then is we create educational materials that cover the lessons that we learned during those steps, during that process. And then step six is, rinse, repeat. Go find the next environmental situation and put it through those same steps. So because we have that operating basis, we've taken on, as I said, a wide variety of things. When the BP oil spill happened, we took that on to find an actual solution to cleaning up that oil. And then when we found a solution that actually there was no reason why it shouldn't be implemented, it had jumped through all the science hoops to even be on the official list that the government puts out, that if you're on that list, you can be considered for use in cleaning up an oil spill. But then we had to research why the at that time extremely corrupt EPA, this was during the Obama administration, um, was playing every dirty trick in the book to prevent it from being implemented. And so, I mean, it's just each one of these has its own set of challenges that go with it that end up being a whole story in themselves. Um, but that solution that we found is now being used based on help from all of the educational materials that we created about it in over 80 countries around the world to clean up massive spills that previously they had no real solution.
Nice.
They would pretend to clean them up, but they didn't clean them up. But this actually would do it with no environmental trade-offs.
Unfortunately,
so that's one example.
Unfortunately,
right?
politics tends to be a major factor in most of our earth problems.
Yes, it's true. And I did a podcast a couple of years ago, and the interviewer said to me, your tagline should be environmental solutions without the politics, right? Because he immediately got we're not interested in that at all. We're interested in finding
Right.
what's the real truth, and then what's the solution that benefits everyone. And we've always been able to find really great solutions that did in fact benefit everyone.
Nice.
So to answer your question about how I got into water, I started looking at what was happening on the planet water-wise, and it's a massive, massive issue that most people, particularly in the United States, because most of us we take it so for granted. You turn the tap on and the water runs,
Yep.
right? Yeah, and so we aren't really aware of what an enormous issue this is, but interestingly, it has even become an enormous issue in the U.S. If you look at a map of the U.S. or of the world, you'll see, particularly if you compare like over the last 20, 30, 40 years, there is this progressive desertification, which means good land turning to desert, that's occurring, and particularly in the American Southwest. Most of the southwestern states, if not all of them, are undergoing extreme long-term drought, and the primary reason for it is poor agricultural methods, methods that can pretty easily be improved and turn that around and change it. But in the meantime, there's just farmers and ranchers are almost all of the southwestern states are literally being so restricted, or in some places even cut off from the water that they need to be able to survive, or for their farms and ranches to survive. The largest aquifer under the United States is called the Ogallala, and it's under 7 states. Like I did, I can't name them all off, but New Mexico, Utah, uh, Arkansas, those central Southwest states. And there are so many straws, if you will, in that aquifer, which is, for anyone who doesn't know what an aquifer is, it's like an underground lake, basically. And that is, huge number, by far the majority of wells that are drilled go into shallow groundwater, which are aquifers. So that there's so many straws in the form of wells in the Ogallala reservoir that it is or aquifer that is literally gone down by a massive amount in the last 50 years, and they think that it's actually going to dry up in the next 15 to 20
Hmm.
years. Right? So that will have, if that occurs and there is no other solution, that will have a massive destabilizing impact on the United
Well,
States and the world's food
some quick
security.
numbers that shows that there's 35 billion in crops annually relying on that aquifer.
I missed that. 35 billion
In
in what?
crops annually, crop production coming from that aquifer.
Crops.
Yeah.
Right, right, right. So coming just from that one
Yes.
aquifer, is that what you looked
Yes.
at? And there, that shows you. I mean, can you imagine the devastation to food security, to the entire industry of farming and ranching, if they don't have access to adequate sources of water? I mean, this is a huge
So
problem.
how does this? Let me jump back. How does this differ from the Dust Bowl in the 30s? It went dry then too. What's the, and we got over it and moved forward. Why is
Right.
this different?
That's a good question. I haven't actually stopped to think about the differences between those. If I were just thinking off the top of my head, um, uh, certainly back in the 30s, they didn't have the equipment that they have now,
Mhm.
uh, for finding water. It was the agriculture that caused
Right.
that dust
Right.
bowl. No question about it, right? Um, um, there have been some good changes in water management regulations and that sort of thing, which I'm sure contributed to getting over the Dust Bowl. But we're headed right back into that same direction in terms of the impacts of it. And but here's the good news. I don't want to just be alarming. There's extraordinarily good news, which is that back in the 1930s, there was a man by the name of Stephen Reese, and he was a geologist. He was actually, when before Hoover became president, his family earned their wealth from mining. They had a lot of, it had a big mining company. And Reese was one of their senior geologists. And he discovered, through a series of things that happened, um, uh, and and created this scientific paradigm that was fought tooth and nail by a lot of other scientists. But the more it's been looked into, it's been basically proven to be true, or in drilling wells under that paradigm, people are a lot more successful. And here's what the theory was. Um, because of the increasing pressure, the deeper you go into the planet, surface waters can only trickle down so far before they literally cannot go any farther. There's sort of a demarcation point. And just simply because of the pressure, it doesn't have to be stopped by hard rock. It's just because of the pressure, it can't go farther than that. But they were drilling these silver mines much deeper than that demarcation point, and they would hit into these rock structures, and water would start pouring out that was so voluminous they couldn't even stop it. And these extremely expensive mines would get totally drowned out. They couldn't even pump the water out fast enough. So this completely went against this concept of like all water, this scientific consensus that the majority of the water on the planet came from meteors from outer space, which, if you think about it for about 5 seconds, makes no sense whatsoever when you look at the volume of the oceans. How is that possible, right? So he discovered that the planet actually makes water, and it makes it in the hot lava in the what's called the magma level under the Earth's crust. And then the intense heat and pressure creates a synthesis between hydrogen and oxygen. And because of the pressure, it finds its way up through cracks and fissures in the Earth's surface as a gas until it gets to a point where it cools into a liquid. And that the majority of the water on the planet actually was created in that way. So he then went on to create the beginnings of a science of how to locate those fissures and cracks, bringing that water up from these far deeper resources than just the shallow groundwater that's near or reasonably near the surface. And that science went on through a couple of other people's hands to become more and more advanced, and utilizing more and more scientifically advanced methodology for locating those fissures. So about 9 years ago, we acquired that technology, and we now own this technology, and we've expanded it. I have a team of scientists, and they have expanded and advanced that technology even further, so that we now have a 100% success rate whenever we look for water. If there's water there, we can find it. So, we can't find water if it's not there. But with a large enough piece of property, we have been able to find water every single time. So, and a good sources of it. For example, and we've done over 70 projects for ranchers and farmers throughout the American Southwest, and a couple in Australia. And then we did some work for a mining company in Chile, and then for the country of Bahrain. So gradually we're doing this work around the world, and it's such an exciting solution, because when you tap into these fissures that are bringing water up from these far deeper sources, you're not drawing down the shallow groundwater or taking too much of the surface water. So it allows those two things to recharge, because you're accessing a alternative source of water. And the other extremely good piece of news about this is that it's been discovered that there's 5 times as much water coming up from this alternative source as there is water in the oceans.
That's a big number.
5 times. Yeah. So that means even if you didn't recycle a drop of water, which we certainly don't recommend, right? We recommend responsible utilization of our water resources, no matter how much you have. But that even if you didn't recycle a drop of water, tapping into this as a resource is enough water at our current utilization rates to have plenty of water for the next 1,000 years.
Looking at it real quick, I did some fast research before we got on the call. Not everyone agrees with your science.
Yes.
But I have noticed that that's changing over the last couple of years. So how long have you been at this, first of all?
We've been at it since 2013. That's when I first came across this theory. Mm-hmm. And when I saw it, I thought, oh my God, if this is true, without any exaggeration, this is the missing piece for water management, to completely have a full capacity to resolve any access to fresh water, freshwater scarcities.
So if you don't mind, what is the counter argument? What are people saying is wrong with your science?
Where the only place that we've come into, a temptation to jump on the squirrel wheel of our scientists against your scientists.
Mm-hmm. But scientists love that stuff.
Assiduously avoided.
Scientists love that stuff. They get to publish lots of
Absolutely.
papers when they get to argue.
Right. The people that have been hostile towards this have been the people that have been teaching it for 40 years, and it threatens the paradigm that they've been teaching. It's right.
That story is
that
story's as old as teachers and humanity.
Exactly.
Yeah, don't rock my boat.
Exactly, exactly. So we actually, it's always interesting to me. I always become suspicious when I hear um, someone, scientists, um, trying to denigrate the character of others rather than going, oh, wait a minute, no, here's the missing piece of science that you don't have. And it's why you're off base with this. If you look at this and this and this, that explains that, right? But if you start getting attacked by, your personality or your credentials or that kind of thing, then I immediately start, flaps up, suspicions start going up of like, what's the motivation behind this criticism? So, but you're right, more and more. What interestingly, about 8 years ago, there were a group of Japanese scientists that came out with a science paper saying that they had just discovered enormous quantities of fresh water far deeper than had ever been realized before, right? But what was fascinating to me is that they didn't connect the dots of that this water would be being brought up to the surface or close to the surface through these fissures. They thought no one's going to drill down into the magma level, So this is an inaccessible resource, which was right. We've proven that to be utterly false.
So, if this is such a great technology, why isn't it being implemented faster?
We're going as fast as we can, right? If we had a lot more, I mean, we've had to bootstrap this thing up out of nothing, literally, right? And one of the things that we did, it was never my intention that the Earth Organization would become a water location and drilling company, right? Our purpose is to find, real environmental solutions, and then either get those implemented or get them into the hands of another group or groups that would implement it, so that we could then go on to the next environmental situation to find the solution to that. So what we did is we actually created a for-profit company called Aquiterix, and we have licensed them to use this tech, and they are out doing these projects around the world. So again, that company's been in business for 6 years now, and they're going, they're definitely going, but it's a process. It's a process to start a company and make it successful and put all the establishment and train the staff and all of these things. It's like it takes time. That said, I'm extremely excited because, without any exaggeration, this is the solution, for example, to these AI centers who are in desperate need of massive quantities of water. But people are extremely concerned that they're going to be using up water that's, already somewhat scarce and precious just for communities. But this actually, if these AI centers would let us, find water location and drill wells around these centers, we could absolutely provide the water necessary that wouldn't be drawing down local surface and shallow groundwaters to supply that. So that's another extremely good news. We just have to get it out there.
Where there is,
If you know Elon Musk,
oh yeah,
please introduce me.
little bit above my level. But where there is AI, there is money. So that
Yes,
that is
yeah,
a path.
yeah,
But how does this help?
yeah.
I'm still trying to get back to the core of why do I care about this? Data centers getting AI, water, whatever.
Right,
My tap, my faucet. You were
right,
talking about drying out on the west coast here. You know, what is
yeah.
how does this affect my water prices? How expensive is it? I guess is a good first question. to bring this water up? Is it cost effective?
It is very cost effective because these wells, um, uh, I asked, Paul Power is the name of a man who met Stephen Reese when Paul was 15 years old, and it changed the course of his life. And he ended up working with Reese until 1982 when Reese died. And I think Paul was probably in his 40s or something then. Paul passed away a couple of years ago now. But I asked Paul, um, uh, oh my God, I just lost my train of thought. Where was I going with this?
We're talking about cost
That's,
effectiveness, how much it takes to get it up. Does it work?
oh, I know what I'm saying. Yes, thank you. So Paul told me that of all the wells that they had drilled, he had drilled with Reese, he didn't know of any of them that had gone dry,
Oh, wow.
right? Which is phenomenal. So they were tapping into these fissures, and just abundant water was coming up, and year after year after year. So while it's not necessarily cheap to be able to drill down, first of all, higher aquaterics and find exactly where to drill, and have to drill down sometimes 800,000 feet. But if that well is going to supply you with water, for the rest of your life, then that's a very good good investment. No guarantees of that. Obviously, it's geology, it's hydrogeology, but it's those are just interesting statistics.
So I hear you say that you have a number of installations and places this work, but it sounded like those are all agriculture and ranch. Have you done this for communities?
We just finished a project for the city of El Paso,
Nice.
and they are in desperate need of more water. We found a good resource for them there. And then they just came back to us. When I say us, it's Aquaterix actually that they're working with. But they just came back to Aquaterix again and want them to do another project for them. So that's just something right there, right? They did the El Paso project at the end of this last year, kind of wrapped that up the beginning of this year, and then immediately they turned right around and wanted to hire them again. And there are a couple of other cities that are reaching now. So the more, each time we do a project, that word gets out farther and farther, and I expect pretty soon there's going to be a tsunami of interest and reaches for this that's going to become, one of those wonderful problems to have.
Yeah, yeah.
How do we deliver?
Unfortunately, as a world, we're getting less and less food and water supply and more people. That's not always a sustainable path. So,
Right.
what's your vision for how much of our water supply will come from this? Are you thinking this is going to totally replace water supplies or augment what we already have?
I think it'll augment it. I think we'll augment it. There are certain areas where, um, there are so many variables when it comes to geology and hydrogeology. It's a fascinating subject because of that. But it makes, every property somewhat different. And but we do see this as the missing piece in water management. For instance, the project in Bahrain, it turned out that we had to tell them, don't drill for water, because that entire little island country is sitting on a massive salt dome, right? And so it would be far worse for them if they tap into that salt and start bringing salt water up onto their surface there. So again, one of the things that's incredible about this technology is how precise it is, because by the time we're done, we have these phases, and by the time we're done with the last phase, we can tell the landowner precisely where to drill. Not, don't drill 20 feet over there, drill right here. We can tell them precisely how deep to drill. You're going to have to go down 276 feet or meters. And You're going to hit water at 87 feet. Don't stop there because it's only, you're only probably going to get about 5 gallons per minute there. But if you go down to this deeper part, you're going to get a range of somewhere between, this and this. That kind of precision is completely unheard of in the water location industry. Additionally, we have a piece of very sophisticated equipment now that can tell us even before they start drilling whether the water at that level is saline or not. Because it's just as bad to to drill a dry borehole and get nothing for having spent all that money as it is to drill into, a saline water source that you can't use. It's the same result. So the steps that we take are not only incredibly precise, but they also cut out almost like, the majority of any risk connected with drilling for water. And the risk is high, as most landowners who've had to drill for water know. The risk is high. There was one farmer, for example, in Australia, who had had 6 dry boreholes drilled on his property, and each one of those had cost him $100,000. So he'd spent over $500,000 and got nothing for it, right? And he'd been told by the experts, well, obviously there's no water here. We went in, we used our tech. First time we hit it, and we got him a very good source of water. So it's, for any landowner that's ever had to look for water on their property or drill for water and drilled a dry borehole, you know how risky and expensive that can be. And when you talk to farmers throughout the American Southwest, I mean, it's very, very real to them. The water issues are the biggest problem they're having. And because of, for instance, things like the Colorado River and the Rio Grande have been so drawn down from all the straws in it, right? That now, massive areas of agricultural and ranch land, the government is being extraordinarily restrictive on how much water they can use, and it's either putting them out of business or making their, really suppressing their ability to thrive.
So what's the future hold? What's it going to look like different? Rub the crystal ball. What's it going to be 5-10 years from now?
The more we can get the word out on this solution, it's going to change everything. For example, I still find this absolutely unbelievable that in the year 2026 in the United States of America, there are over 1,000 colonias along the Mexican-American border. On the American side, the colonia is like a small village that have no water. They're having to truck in all their water, over 1,000 of these little villages, right? We could solve that. For example, one of the projects that we're raising funds for is that in Kenya, the entire northern part of Kenya is one very large province. And the drought in northern Kenya now that they've had has been quite extreme for the last 6 years. And, for hundreds of years, they go into serious droughts and, they have famine and, the poverty in the area is horrific. But with our tech, we could actually sustainably solve that by drilling these kinds of water wells for those villages so that they don't have to be dependent on rain and surface waters to be able to survive. I mean, there are women there literally that are having to walk up to 35 miles to fetch water.
Oof.
I mean, can you even imagine? And, kids aren't able to go to school because the schools are closed because there's no water. Something like the crux of their entire economy there is their cattle. and 90% of their cattle have died because 80% of the surface waters in the area have dried up. I mean, these are problems that Americans have a very hard time even conceiving of, right? But the solution is we've got the solution. We just need the funding to be able to, deploy it on the scale that we could deploy it.
If I wanted to learn more about this, where would I go? What would I do?
Well, a good start would be one, you can go to the Earth Organization's website, which is www.the, don't forget the word theearthorganization.org. There's some data about deep-seated, we call it deep-seated water, and our deep-seated water technology. There's some data there about that. They could also go to aquaterix.com, which is the for-profit we started. And that is Aqua, A-Q-U-A, Terex, Terex.com. And there's in-depth data about it there.
Nice.
Those would be the two best places to go.
Thank you for being on today. This has been absolutely fascinating.
Victor, thank you so much. And, I so appreciate your help in getting the word out on this. Extremely good news.
Thank you. Well, I am still Victor Ciccarelli. This has been the 4D Side Podcast. We have been here with Barbara Wiseman tonight. Thank you. We'll see you all again next week.